Okay, first I was asked to dedicate the shir today. A refuah shlema. I have actually 6 names, a single family. I wanted to dedicate for 6 people. Cholim, Moshe Asher ben Esther Sarah, Naomi Rivka bat Chana Tova, Shemona Natana bat Chana Esther, Elisheva Malka bat Liba Rina, and Leah Eliza bat Lina Rina, and Elisheva bat Bella. They should have a refuah shlema, the Sof Shachal Yisrael. Okay, the last thing we were looking at in Perek Hey of Sefer Yoshua, we were looking at the bris milah that they all had, because the Dor HaMidbar did not have a milah for all of those years. And then they brought the Korban Pesach. This is in Gilgal. This is where they went when they crossed the Yarden. And then it mentions they ate mimocharas HaPesach, the day after Pesach. They ate from the grain, and the Gemara explains that they could not eat from the grain of Eretz Yisrael until the 16th of Nisan because of the Easter of Chodosh, meaning until that point, Hashem made a miracle that the man that they collected before Moshe's death, they were allowed to collect a lot of man and it didn't spoil, unlike the normal idea of the man spoiling the next morning. And they stopped eating man on the 16th of Nisan because of the Isser of Chodosh, and the 16th of Nisan is the day they bring the Omer, the barley offering, so they are allowed to eat the Chodosh. So first I want to talk about maybe a minor, nothing's minor in Torah, but a linguistic point that's actually very, very interesting that Taisus talks about in Rosh Hashanah. And that is, what is the meaning of the term Pesach in Tanakh? When the Torah says something happened on Pesach. Now, when we say Pesach, we always mean the 15th of Nisan and the holiday for 7 days. But the question becomes, does Pesach mean the day that you bring the Korban Pesach, which of course is the 14th of Nisan? Or does Pesach mean the day that you eat the Korban Pesach, which is the night of the 15th of Nisan? Is Pesach going on Shechitas Pesach? Or is Pesach going on Achilas Pesach? So Taisus in Rosh Hashanah says there's actually a contradiction between a pasuk in the Torah and a pasuk in Sefer Yoshua. In Parshas Masai, the Torah says the following: Mimocharas HaPesach Yatsu B'nei Yisrael. B'nai Yisrael left Mitzrayim the day after Pesach. Now, what do you mean? I thought the Jewish people left Mitzrayim on Pesach. That's why there's a holiday called Pesach. So what does it mean when it says the Jewish people left Mitzrayim the day after Pesach? What does Pesach mean? It means the slaughtering of the Korban Pesach. They shechted the Korban Pesach on the 14th. They ate it that night, and they left the next morning. So they left Mimacharas HaPesach. They left the day after they shechted the Korban Pesach. So in the Torah, it's clear that Pesach is referring to the time of Shechita, not the time of Achila. Now let's fast forward to the pasuk in Sefer Yehoshua, which says they ate mimocharas HaPesach from the grain of Eretz Yisrael. He uses the same words, mimocharas HaPesach. And Chazal, although the pasuk doesn't say the reason was Chodesh, but Chazal explain because until mimocharas HaPesach, there was an Isser of Chodesh. Now, one second here. The day that you bring the Omer is the 16th of Nisan. And if that is described as the day after Pesach, that must mean that Pesach is the 15th of Nisan, because that is both the holiday of Pesach and the time that they ate the Korban Pesach. So you hear the kasha. So Tosfos asks the kasha. In fact, it's very interesting who asked the kasha to whom. It's brought down in Tosfos that the Ibn Ezra had a discussion with Rabbeinu Tam. It's very, very fascinating. It's the only place in Shas, I think, where the Ibn Ezra is mentioned. Could you imagine the meeting? The Ibn Ezra, the great leader in Spain, meets Rabbeinu Tam, and they discuss this question. So you understand the question, meaning in the Torah, Pesach seems to be Yud Dalet, which is the Shchitas of Pesach. In Sefer Yoshua, Pesach seems to be Tesvav, which is both the holiday of Pesach. By the way, the Torah never calls the holiday of Pesach Pesach. The name for the holiday of Pesach in the Torah is Chag HaMatzos. There is no place at all in the Torah where the holiday, the Yom Tov, is called Chag HaPesach. It is always called Chag HaMatzos. But we call it Chag HaPesach, that's okay. So, but there is a stira, meaning is Pesach Yud Daled, which is what the Chumash suggests, or is Pesach Tesvav? And consequently, is Mimacharas HaPesach the 15th, or is Mimacharas HaPesach the 16th? Mimacharas, the next day. So one answer that Tosfos gives, which doesn't really explain the answer, he says, Lashon Torah l'chut, Lashon Nevi'im l'chut, that there doesn't have to be a consistency in usage between the Torah's vocabulary and even the Nevi'im. Meaning, when the Torah uses Pesach, it refers to the 14th. Mimacharas HaPesach is therefore the 15th. When the Nevi'im use the word Pesach, they mean the 15th, and Mimacharas HaPesach is the 16th. Meaning, just as the Gemara says in many places, that the Chachamim's Hebrew usage is not always going to be the same as Tanakh's Hebrew usage, right? Biblical Hebrew and Rabbinic Hebrew are not always the same. So Tosfos wants to say in one answer that even within Tanakh itself, the Lashon of Nevi'im is not always the same as the Lashon of the Torah. Of course, that doesn't explain why that should be so. I mean, why should they diverge? I don't know, and Tosfos doesn't say, but this is one suggested answer, which means Eino Chinami. In the Torah, Pesach means the 14th. Mimacharas HaPesach is the 15th. In the Sefer Yoshua, Pesach means the 15th, and Mimacharas HaPesach is the 16th. And they were not able to eat the grain until the 16th because of the Omer and the Yisr of Chodosh, exactly as we said. But Lamaisa, there's another answer that's a little bit more complicated, but it actually fits the Psukim very, very well. And this is based on an interesting Chiddush of the Haflah. The Haflah was one of the great Achronim, Rav Pinchas Halevi Horowitz, and he was one of the great Ga'ainim in the time of the Pnei Yehoshua and the like, and the Haflah is the name of his Sefer on Kesuvos. It's interesting, I don't want to digress into the history of what Sfarim made the yeshiva world and what didn't. As you know, the yeshiva world, even in its eon, is actually fairly selective in which Achronim make the canon. Because a lot of the Achronim were osek in Pilpulim, that Rav Chaim's derech was not makabel. So certain Sfarim made the grade, the Ksais, the Nesivos, the Minchas Chinuch, even though they're pre-Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, they're kind of like honorary briskers in the sense that they're admitted in. Pnei Yehoshua, Bisman Hazeh, but in a lot of places, Pnei Yehoshua was not necessarily even makubal that much there. So the Haflah was one of the Svarim that became honorary briskers. It was admitted in the Litvische canon. So the Haflah says a very interesting chiddush. He actually says that we know in halacha that the definition of a day is first night and then day. That we begin a new day at night. Monday or Yom Sheni begins Sunday night after Tzeitzei Kochavim. Shabbos, of course, begins Friday night and Shabbos. That's called Hayom Holech Achar Halayla. The day is assigned to the night before, meaning night and then day. This is said to be based, at least according to one drasha, on the pasuk, Vayhi Erev, Vayhi Baiker, Yom Echad. There was an evening and a day, and that was a day, right? So v'hi'erev v'hi'boker. But says the Haflag a Chiddush that only applied after Matan Torah. When Hashem gave us the Torah, that's when He told us v'hi'erev v'hi'boker, and therefore only after Matan Torah does the day follow the night. Prior to Matan Torah, we followed the more intuitive thing that a day begins in the morning and evening, and that's a day. Meaning before Matan Torah, halayla holech achar hayom. In fact, the Hafla uses this to answer a very, very famous kasha, and that is, we say Avraham Avinu kept the whole Torah before it was given. Avraham Avinu intuitively understood. He was not obligated. Remember, be sure you don't misunderstand this. He was not obligated to keep the Torah because God didn't give it yet. But the the Mishnah says Avraham Avinu. Chazal seem to extend it to the Avos as well, Yitzchak and Yaakov. Yeah.
Sorry, maybe I'm misunderstanding, but in the first answer that the Nevi'im has one thing for when the day is, and the Chodosh is another. What do we do, like, in relation to that answer? We just, like, pick one? Like, we pick the Chodosh's answer for when Pesach is?
Well, in point of fact, we apparently follow Yehoshua, because we call the holiday Pesach.
How is that?
It's a good question, but apparently if the Nevi'im felt that the usage was not exact, so they felt we were permitted to depart. Now, there's a Hasidic vort from Rav Levi Yitzchak of Breitowitz. He says the following vort. He says a nice thing. He says, we know the Gemara in Brachos says HaKadosh Baruch Hu has tefillin. He wears tefillin, whatever that means. And the Gemara then asks, well, in our tefillin, we praise Hashem. Shema Yisrael, there's only one God. What parshios are in Hashem's tefillin? The answer is psukim that praise the Jewish people. Mi ka'amcha Yisrael, who is like your nation Israel. So our tefillin praise HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and Hashem's tefillin praise Am Yisrael. Right? This is the Gemara in Brachos. So says the Breitowitz, matzos is what we did. Right? We baked matzah for Hashem. So Hashem calls the holiday of Pesach based on what we did for Him. We baked matzah for Him to celebrate. Pesach is what Hashem did for us. He passed over the houses. And Memela, we call the Yom Tov based on what Hashem did for us, and Hashem calls the Yom Tov based on what we did for Hashem. Therefore, it's very similar to the Tefillin Mikamcha Yisrael Goyachad B'Yaretz. In fact, the famous vort of the Breitowitz in another context, but it's the same idea. He used to say, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if Chas v'Shalom we drop your tefillin, we pick it up and we kiss it and we try to take care of it. And we are your tefillin, and we are dropped and stepped on and kicked. Don't you have to pick us up? Don't you have to embrace us? Don't you have to kiss us? Because we are your tefillin. How can you allow your tefillin to be on the ground in all of those different ways? But going back to the Hafla says that Kaidem Matan Torah, the definition of a day, was day-night. So says the Hafla, the kasha on Avraham Avinu was this. If the Avos kept the whole Torah before it was given, they were not commanded, but intuitively they understood that this was the foundation of the universe. But technically they were still B'nai Noach. In other words, they could be machmir if they want, but they can't do something that a Ben Noach is usher to do because they weren't really Jewish yet. They were still B'nai Noach. So the Gemara says a non-Jew is not allowed to keep Shabbos. Goy Shabbos, if a non-Jew keeps Shabbos, he's actually Chayav Misa. It doesn't mean Basin kills him, but in God's book, he's Chayav Misa. So how could Avraham Avinu opt to be Machmir, to keep Shabbos, since he's not Mechuyev, and technically his status is a Ben Noach? Goy Shabbos, Chayav Misa. They tell the story about a young man in yeshiva who was not yet Jewish. He was studying to be a ger. But he was very, very, very frum, very, very devout. He was a tremendous masmid, machmir in halacha. So for some reason, sometimes people have bad midos. People thought he was being a balgaiva. He was so proud of his religiosity. So somebody went over to him and said, "You think you're such a tzaddik? Every single week, you're committing a big aveira because you're so meticulous in keeping Shabbos. And you're violating the halacha that a guy has to be machal Shabbos. So who do you think you are?" So the guy looks back at them and said, "I make sure to carry in your eruv every week." so that way I'm machal Shabbos. That's what the ger said. That's what the guy said. Okay, but be it as it may. So listen to the Haflah's ingenious teretz. The Haflah's ingenious answer is, what was the definition of Shabbos prior to Matan Torah? Saturday and Saturday night. It's only after Matan Torah that Shabbos got redefined as Friday night and Shabbos. So Avraham Avinu made a point to always do malacha Saturday night. So Memela, as a goy, he was machalel Shabbos as he needed to do, but he did keep the Shabbos that the Jewish people would eventually keep after Matan Torah. This is the ingenious teretz of the Haflah regarding Avraham Avinu being able to keep Shabbos. Another answer they give, I don't remember if the Haflah gives it, is Avraham Avinu wore tzitzis, which he did. So here's the idea. For a guy, tzitzis is not a garment, and therefore it's carrying. So as a Ben Noach, he carried. As a Jew, he didn't carry. He was able to do a split thing where it's a malacha mitzad being a Ben Noach, and it's not a malacha mitzad being a Jew. Yeah.
Yes, so there's always a common question about who was the first Jew, and then people often answer that saying, "Oh, it was Abraham Avinu." If he was a goy,
Yeah. Yes. So the truth of the matter is, I'm covering up a lot of other stuff here. Meaning there is indeed a huge machlokas if the Avos still had the laws of a Ben Noach. Some say the Avos already were established as a separate nation, and they no longer had the Noachite laws. There's two huge drushos, the classical text from the Mishnah L'Melech. Right, the Mishnah L'Melech is the great commentary on the Rambam, but he wrote a sefer of drushos on Chumash called Parashas Derachim. And the first two drushos of the Parashas Derachim go on for many, many pages regarding whether the Avos had the status of Bnei Noach or they were considered to be a separate Jewish nation. The Haflah is assuming the tzad that they had the dinim of Bnei Noach. Yeah.
Hey, what does it mean that the Avos just the third Torah even mitzvot the Rabbanan when they were not chachamim back then?
Yeah. So the answer must be that there was a Ruach HaKodesh. There was kind of a divine prophecy that they understood what would happen. They understood what the will of Hashem was. And once again, I emphasize this was not a mandatory thing. In fact, there's a lot of kashas. How could Yaakov marry two sisters? If you're talking about the Avos keeping the Torah, there are things that they didn't always keep. But the Maharal basically says, without getting into complicated answers, that since this was not an obligation, so they normally strive to keep the Torah, but if there were reasons they could depart from it, they felt that was justified, which would not be true today. Today, we're chayav to keep the Torah, so we can't make our justifications. Then the Avos were able to make certain justifications. Yeah.
So let's say I understand they weren't chayav, but does that mean that their Seder looked exactly like our Seder looks today? Is it expressed the same way?
Listen, not only did their Seder not look like our Seder, the Chazal Seder didn't look like our Seder either. Things, obviously, there are different minhagim that are added. We're not saying, were the Avos Ashkenaz or Sfard or Taimani. Obviously, I don't know, really. It doesn't mean they kept every single minhag of different Edot and the like. But the basic chiyuvim of halacha, even Drabbanans, they did keep. Okay. So now, listen to this. Based on the Haflah's Yisaid, listen to this amazing answer. The word Pesach, both in the Torah and in the book of Yoshua, has the same meaning. the day you ate the Pesach, not the day you shechted the Pesach. But here's the thing. When we ate the Korban Pesach in Mitzrayim, it was before Matan Torah. So the 14th of Nisan was day and then night. So the night we ate the Pesach under the old calendar was the 14th of Nisan. Therefore, the Torah says we left the day after eating the Pesach, which was the 15th of Nisan. Because under the old calendar, the 14th of Nisan was the day and then the night. But Yehoshua is after Matan Torah. After Matan Torah, the night of eating is now the 15th of Nisan. Therefore, Mimacharas HaPesach is the 16th. So yes, there is a divergence. In the Chumash, Mimacharas HaPesach is the 15th. And in Sefer Yehoshua, Mimacharas HaPesach is the 16th. It's different dates, but it's a consistent definition of the word Pesach based on the differential of day and night. You see? In other words, in Pesach Mitzrayim, it was Kaidem Matan Torah. And therefore, the Shechita and the Achila was the same calendar day. We shechted in the day, and we ate at night. That was 14th. We left the next morning. That was 15th. But by the time of Yehoshua, we shecht on the 14th, and we eat on the 15th. So we left Mitzrayim on that day, and when did the Jewish people eat the new grain? Only on the 16th, right? So that's an ingenious reconciliation of again, it's a different, the references are different days, to be sure, but the definition of Pesach is a consistent definition. Okay, this is the teretz of the hafla. Okay. Alrighty, but be it as it may, we have an issue of Chodosh. So again, just to digress for a moment, just to be sure people understand this, let me go back and explain a little bit what the issue of Chodosh is. Chodosh means new grain. When something is not Chodosh, it's called Yashan, right? So all grain is either Chodosh or Yashan. Chodosh does not apply to fruits and vegetables. It only applies to grains. And by grains, we mean the chamisha, not rice, or the chamisha minei dagan, for which you make hamotzi, for which you make mazonos, which are kosher for matzah, for which you separate challah, chameshes minei dagan, right? Only those things. Now, the way it works is this. When the Omer is brought, a barley offering is brought on the 16th of Nisan, the barley offering matirs for human consumption any grain that took root before that day. Now, but here's what I mean. It doesn't only matir grain that is actually already growing, and it doesn't only matir grain that was already harvested, but any grain that already took root in the ground. Now, again, Chazal have a machlokas. How long does it take after planting to be considered to be rooted in the ground? We paskin 2 weeks. So basically what it means is the following, therefore. Any grain that was planted 2 weeks before the 16th of Nisan, even if none of it is above the ground yet, when the Omer is brought on the 16th of Nisan, that grain, when it's eventually harvested, is going to be called Yashan, not Chodosh, because it was Hishrish. It took root before the Hakravas HaOmer. Masha'en kain, any grain that did not take root before the Hakravas HaOmer, either because you planted it within 2 weeks of the second day of Pesach, or you planted it after the second day of Pesach, is not mutter with the Hakravas HaOmer, so it's not going to be mutter until next Omer. Because vis-a-vis next Omer, this had already taken root before next Omer. Okay, so the definition of Chodosh and Yashan is based on Hishrish or Lo Hishrish. Hishrish before the Omer matters. Loi Hishrish Kaidem HaOmer, you cannot eat that grain until next Omer. Because by next Omer, it is Hishrish before the next Omer. Okay, so that's very important. Now, Bisman HaMikdash, you could not eat this grain until a Korban Omer was actually brought. Which would mean if Chas v'Shalom, there was some accident and the Omer was not brought on that day, you would never, there's no hope until next year. You would not be allowed to eat that grain for a whole year. You'd have to have the next Omer do it. Now, the Gemara has a drasha that Bisman, when there's no Beis HaMikdash, what matirs the Chodosh is the Heyer, the dawn of the 16th, meaning the day itself matters, meaning the morning, the beginning of the morning of the 16th of Nisan. The dawn of the 16th of Nisan, you are allowed to eat the Chodosh. Again, the definition is still the same. If it was Hishrish before, Heyer HaMizrach, light on the eastern horizon. That refers to dawn, not even sunrise. Dawn, not night. Matters. Okay, so we have two different drashas. Bisman HaMikdash, the actual Korban HaOmer matters. Shelo Bisman HaMikdash, Heyer HaMizrach matters. But in both cases, the definition of what it matters is Hishrish. That definition does not change. Okay, so that's the second thing. So first thing is Korban HaOmer. Second thing is Heyer HaMizrach. Third thing is a takana of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, you may recall, if you learned the Gemara in Gittin on Tisha B'Av about the Churban Beis HaMikdash, the story of Kamsa Bar Kamsa. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who was actually a Talmid of Hillel, he was the youngest of the Talmid of Hillel, but he was kind of the leader of the Jewish people at the time of the Churban Bayis Sheni. In fact, it's interesting, he, of course, obviously was a great Gadol B'Torah, but politically it's very interesting to analyze because he was actually, vis-a-vis the Romans, he is what you would call a pacifist. He was absolutely against any military activity against the Romans because he felt, as was the case indeed, that if we fight against the Romans, they're going to be machriv the Beis HaMikdash, and if we simply accept the taxes and everything else, they'll let us keep our religion. So Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai was actually a controversial figure because there were many Yidden who wanted to wage war against the Romans for, a political rebellion and everything else, and he was the one who tried to stop it, etc. But be it as it may, the Gemara tells us that after the Churban Beis HaMikdash, he made a number of takanais, and one of his takanais was Yom Hanaf, the day of the waving. That's called the day of the 16th of Nisan because the Omer offering was waved. It was up and down. The day of the waving, which is the 16th of Nisan, Kulai Asur, meaning, Da'oraisa, when there's no Beis HaMikdash, you could eat the Chodosh the morning of the 16th. He made a takana that entire day is forbidden, and you cannot eat the Chodosh till the morning of the 17th. Why did he do this? He did this, it doesn't seem to be a big deal. He just assered it one extra day, but really there's a psychological point here. He wanted people to always think that the Beis HaMikdash could be rebuilt immediately. Now, here is his problem. Let's assume I got into the habit that I could eat Chodosh the morning of the 16th. And next year, the Beis HaMikdash is rebuilt. Now, once the Beis HaMikdash is rebuilt, I can't eat the morning of the 16th. I'm going to have to wait till they bring the Omer, and that could be any time during that day. So therefore, he forbade you to eat Chodosh on the 16th, because Mehera Yibana HaMikdash, because you have to believe and hope that the Beis HaMikdash is going to be rebuilt. Now, the Gemara does ask, so why do you have to wait until the next morning? Surely, by the end of the 16th, they would have brought it, so eat it at night, or even after Chatzos, it says, because they never brought the Yomer after Chatzos. All right, so the Gemara says, well, maybe the Beis HaMikdash will be built late in the day, come down in Shemaim late in the day. Different cheshbonos. But you understand how this is a very interesting example, how a technical takana of prohibiting Chodosh on the 16th of Nisan was designed to inspire us to always feel that by next year we'll have the Beis HaMikdash. Again, whether it comes down from heaven, whether Mashiach will build it, that's a separate set of machloksim. But this was, Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai saw he had a certain achrayus that when the Jewish people were so decimated, they were so broken, they were so saddened and depressed over the Churban Beis HaMikdash, he wanted to give them hope, and he wanted to give them emunah that the Beis HaMikdash can be rebuilt any time. And he made a takana, can't eat Chodosh on the 16th. Which means, therefore, in Eretz Yisrael, again as a practical matter, we are not allowed to eat Chodosh until the morning of the 17th of Nisan. D'oraisa, when there's no Mikdash, it would be the morning of the 16th. The takana of Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai would mean the morning of the 17th, and this is what the Mishnah calls in Rosh Hashanah, Yom Hanaf, the day of the waving, the day of the Hakravas HaOmer. Had there been a Beis HaMikdash, Kulo Aser, you cannot eat on that day. Now, that also means, in Chutz La'aretz, because we behave with calendrical doubts, so you can't eat the Chodosh until the morning of the 18th. Right? So in Eretz Yisrael, right, you get to eat Chodosh one day earlier than in Chutz La'aretz. In Eretz Yisrael, the morning of the D'oraisa, the morning of the 16th. Midrabanan, Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai, the morning of the 17th. And in Chutz La'aretz, the morning of the 18th. By the way, there's a huge issue here implicit in what I said. Is there an Isser Chodosh on Chutz La'aretz grain? That's a huge, huge machlokas, very nogeh l'halacha today. We know, of course, many, many mitzvos regarding agricultural produce only apply to Eretz Yisrael. Truma and Meiser and Shemitah, they only apply to Eretz Yisrael. Like Chutz La'aretz grain has none of those problems, or produce. But Lagabe Chodosh, there's a huge machlokas in the Gemara, a huge machlokas, if the Isser of Chodosh applies in Chutz La'aretz. Most poskim say you're supposed to be machmir, and that raises a lot of problems. Historically, based on HaRav, American hashgachos were not makpid on whether the Chutz La'aretz grain was Chodosh or Yashan, and they didn't certify it. They were somech that whatever it is, you could be mekel, based on the Ramah. But now the more Mahadran hashgachos will only certify Yashan. Now, let me just point out, based on the concept of Hishrish and Lo Hishrish, though, there are certain times of year where you know for sure that your grain must be Yashan. Let's talk about this. The 16th or 17th of Nisan is going to matcher anything that was Hishrish before Pesach. Now, obviously, any grain that you're going to eat right after Pesach must have been Hishrish before Pesach. So, in truth, approximately, I'm giving you approximately, between Pesach and Sukkot is essentially a Chodosh-free zone. Because the only thing that the Yomer wouldn't matter, or the day wouldn't matter, is something that was planted after Pesach. That's not going to reach markets. I'm very, very approximate, until Sukkot. So, I'm being very approximate, but basically from Pesach to Sukkot, both in Eretz Yisrael and in Chutz La'aretz, if you're machmer, there is no Chodosh problem, because anything that you get is going to be Yashan. So the Chodosh problem begins more or less around Sukkot time, Sukkot to Pesach. So, as I say, many of the mainstream hashgachas in outside of Israel were not certifying Chodosh. Today, some of them do, some of them don't. But because of this, there are yeshivish communities that print magazines that tell you based on product codes when things were planted, when things were harvested. And then you'll notice that a lot of people will they'll buy grain products after Pesach and keep them for the whole year. In other words, because those products are yashon. So they'll buy their spaghetti for the whole year, etc., or whatever it is. And there are magazines, you can get them online, etc. Yashon guides, they're called, and they tell you what products you can buy, what products you cannot buy. But as I say, many are still somech on a psak of the Ramah, that in Chutz La'aretz there's no problem. Now in Eretz Yisrael, and for the produce of Eretz Yisrael, for sure there's an issue of Chodosh. But once again, the hashgachos here, whatever hashgacha you rely upon, will factor in Chodosh. They're not going to allow Chodosh to come to market. So you're not mechuyev in Eretz Yisrael to make calculations, unless you're a farmer, of Chodosh and Yashan. That's going to be factored in to the hashgacha itself. In America, as I say, it might not be factored into the hashgacha. So if you're going to be machmar on it, you're going to have to make your own investigation sometimes. Yeah.
Well, there's an app actually now. You can scan foods and it'll tell you if it's yashan or not.
Okay, Baruch Hashem,
Yeah.
Baruch
The
Hashem.
question is there a Omer Sheni? If someone couldn't bring the Omer, you said they had to.
Yeah.
Year.
Yeah, that's very interesting. There is Pesach Sheni, right? But there's no Omer Sheni. But let me just clarify. Omer was not brought by individual people. There was only one Korban Omer brought for Am Yisrael. It was not like a private thing that a person brought. Okay. Yeah.
So because the Takana, you said it had to be 2 weeks before the Omer.
In order to be rooted, because it has to be rooted before the Omer.
If made the Takana to the next day, did that push that also a day?
That's a good question. I believe not. I believe that the definition of Chodosh remains constant. I'll check it to be sure. Yeah. Say again, D?
And also, if there's no, you said if there's no temple, it goes to when the sun goes up.
Yeah.
It would be an earlier time.
Well, that depends. Okay, that's an interesting question. That depends if you need miyetz liyetz or based on days. Meaning, when you say you need 2 weeks, if we're just talking about days, it's not going to make it earlier. But if it's talking about actual, 14 times 24 hours, then you're right. That actually would make a difference. Yeah, that's a good point. I'll try to check on that. Yeah. Okay. Alrighty. All right. So this actually brings us to where we left off, and I'll carry it over tomorrow. So the Jewish people were eating man until the 16th of Nisan. Comes the 16th of Nisan, they're now able to bring the Omer. They can now eat the grain of Eretz Yisrael. So we are told that the morning of the 16th of Nisan before they brought the Omer, was the last time. Kind of maybe a sad day in some ways. It was the last time they ate the man. I'm not sure exactly, I assume that meant whatever man was left in their kalim just shriveled up or disappeared or something. No man from then on, because once we can eat the grain of Eretz Yisrael, we no longer have a need for the miracle of man. So the 16th of Nisan is the last day of Achilas Man. Okay, so I had mentioned to you, I'll just throw out the question, again tomorrow we'll go over the Terutzim, the question of the Yerushalmi, which points out that actually means that at the first Seder they made at the Korban Pesach, they couldn't have eaten matzah, because the matzah had to come from grain, and the grain in Eretz Yisrael is all Chodosh, and if they didn't eat Chodosh until the 16th, how did they eat matzah? So the Talmud Yerushalmi says, Einachinami, because of the Yisur Chodosh, they didn't eat matzah. So the Yerushalmi asks the question, why don't I say the asay, the mitzvah of matzah, should override the Yisur of Chodosh, since there was no alternative that they had. Okay, so I'll mention, this is a Yerushalmi that Taisus brings in Kedushin. So we'll talk about that in Mishim tomorrow.
Thank you for listening to this Awesome Ech production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.